Welcome to episode 317 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. Joining me in a moment is Kardinal's head of business, Michael Anderson, and we're going to talk about some recent research from Kardinal, talking about last mile strategy and last mile operations. A very interesting conversation brought to us today by Kardinal, so stay tuned. Coming up in just a moment, Michael Anderson, head of business at Kardinal. Joining me on the line is Kardinal's head of business, Michael Anderson. And we are going to get stuck into some highlights from Kardinal's recently released research, last mile optimization in the parcel delivery sector. What are the priorities? That's quite a headline, Michael. Before we do get into some of the details, you've got a bit of a background in the postal and delivery sector. Can you just share a bit of that?
Yeah, more than happy to, Ian. I'm really happy to be here today. I've spent the last 27 years, I think, working in parcels in the Royal Mail Group and across the Royal Mail Group in Parcel Force Worldwide, GLS, and working in the international cross-border team. But always about parcels, always about trying to make it work for companies I'm working for and the partners I'm working with. And then had the joy of spending 3 years working first for Metapack, which became Octane Group. And then since May, head of business here at Kardinal, which is a French deep tech startup that's focusing on how do you get efficiency within last mile delivery operations.
And it's a fascinating topic, really, isn't it? It's a puzzle to be, I almost said unlocked. Do you unlock a puzzle? You solve a puzzle.
Well, yeah, that's probably a better way of putting it.
Let's go with solve. It's a really enthralling subject, really, this idea of route optimization and getting the best out of our delivery networks. Why don't we just start with a bit of an overview of the study that Kardinal has published? Michael, can you just sort of give us an idea of what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. We wanted to really understand what it was that was at the top of the pile in terms of priorities for those people at the coalface, for want of a better phrase, people who are leaders within the operation and people who are leading at an executive level and focused on that final mile element of the business that represents a huge proportion of cost. So we spent 3 months in March through to June of this year recruiting and then talking to what became 127 individuals, mostly in Europe, and asking them basically what's keeping you busy right now, and then looking at what's going to keep you really concerned and prioritising activities and investment in the decade ahead.
And so what were some of the primary findings of the study?
It was very interesting to see some surprises and not some surprises, but what didn't surprise me with my experience was service quality was top of the list for the immediate priorities. Anyone who's worked in the parcel industry knows that's the foundation upon which fundamentally you can build a business. So that didn't surprise us at all. When we looked at the longer term piece, environment and ecology and sustainability as a general topic was a big priority across the board. But at sea level, then it was a very high priority. And then in the middle there, the detail, there's a real concern about resource, as you'd expect, because it's been such a difficult time. And then looking at, okay, how do I build a network that allows me to get that quality of service? So that's both in design of routes themselves and design of the network that the routes run out of. Those were the headlines, and then some great detail in there about how people saw it and how it was split between operational leaders and C-level executives.
Well, let's delve deeper into each of these challenges that you've just outlined there. Well, let's start with profitability. It's key, it's crucial, and everybody's talking about it we've gone from this unprecedented times a few years ago to being sort of this era of fluctuating and volatile parcel volumes. So when it comes to profitability, what were some of the study's discoveries?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The last 3 years have been such a challenge, and that volatility is front of mind for people in an industry that has a profit margin that can't really support many bad years at all. The priorities in there were, as I just mentioned, actually, around how do you get your fleet size right, and how do you get your route design to a point where you can optimize and then be able to deliver your service, but also be in a position where you're not wearing out your resource, in your human resource, be that directly employed, be that subcontracted or some kind of agency activity. So there was a real appreciation of being able to have an optimal design structure, both at route and at depot level. And amongst the two categories, the C-level executives were really focused on that design. They were looking at, okay, how do I make sure my routes are robust? My depot design is also robust. Ops leaders also looking at this. One area that, of course, they're focused on each and every day is their negotiation with subcontractors as well. So price was seen as critical to them. Price was seen as less critical to C-level, still very important, but there was a differentiation there. And what they were seeing was more around, okay, get the design right, and the rate negotiation becomes a more structured process.
I always feel like those things you just outlined are really very much more connected than people think. When it comes to price and quality of service, for example, does the study sort of bear that out?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what are your number one priorities that effectively service first, and so that's what at the C level that stood out as being okay at a overall view. What matters most? Over 50%. If you were to take three, they were asked to take three priorities, and 53% said it's service. And there's a causal link there between service and the fact that you've got a design in place that's robust.
Let's talk about the organisation of last mile operations then.
Yeah.
What were some of your findings there?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's recognised in the industry. It's so difficult to gain stability, and that you're reliant on the great experience of your leaders within the organisation that have got that experience. And again, the priorities that were really thrown out were getting an optimal resource mix. So where you recognise, if you look at some carriers, it's quite, and postal organisations are living with a directly employed model, but across the piece, you've got a mix of directly employed, agency contractors, out-of-home deliveries now, of course, are a huge proportion. So how do you service that and effectively what might be called the gig economy, but those people who are working more as courier style pieces. So that was the top one that came out. And then the ability to adjust your resources when you've got these fluctuating volumes, and knowing there's effectively, if you know your activity levels going forward, can you then adjust your resource plan to be able to do that? So it's saying, okay, customer A has exited, customer B has joined us, or we've got a generic increase in volume, an organic increase in volume. I'm going to forecast my volume, and then I want to be able to optimize my mix. So those were the two that came out as top of the list. And again, very similar to the last piece, those were the two that were seen as the most important at C level. And again, negotiating subcontractor costs was seen as important, and it made it into the top five of priorities. But the split between them, the C level and the operational leaders, was differentiated.
And it's really interesting what you're talking about, so the last mile delivery modes, and how our perception of that's probably changed compared to, what would you say, even 10 years ago. We didn't see as many parcel lockers or Pudos out there. It was very much residential delivery, wasn't it?
Yeah, and completely. And that mix that we're seeing when we're talking to clients, and what you just see by looking at the industry, the capability of a delivery operation to be able to use the best resource available in the territory that it's covered is going to be prime in their success going forward. And optimizing that in a way that allows them to know that it's sustainable, because yes, you can get a great price for delivering an essential element of your delivery mix, of your delivery challenge. But if it's not sustainable, then when it falls down to you to have to replace it at short notice, then you're in a bind and you're not able to focus on that stability. And that's the key word that came out. Again, you saw stability being mentioned throughout the report, that people want to be able to achieve a design that allows them to be stable.
Let's talk about the environment, because it's becoming increasingly front of mind.
Yes.
In delivery world, because of things like green zones in cities or low emission zones and government regulations, not to mention, I suppose, there's probably stuff being driven by shareholders. Anyway, enough of the editorialising from me. Let's talk about the study. What did the study uncover when it comes to the environmental side of last mile delivery? And I'll be interested to hear what you say when it comes to, say, the difference between the CEO level and operational level and things like that.
Yeah, and this is where you saw the biggest difference, and understandably. And when you looked at what the future priorities for the business were, the operational leaders were focused on the profitability and the optimization and the challenge of getting good resource. Talked about it very briefly earlier, but driver side of it. But the C-level were seeing that as energy, ecology and sustainability was absolutely top of the list for them. It was over 50% of them said that that's their number one priority for the next decade. And when you look at the challenge of right now, this is an interpretation of what I'm about to say. It's an interpretation of what you see, but it's important, and it has been really important for the industry to know the footprint and be able to forecast a footprint. And whilst that's still seen as important, it's dropped in the importance level compared to the immediate challenge, firstly, of measuring CO2, and then being able to effect the fleet conversion plans that pretty much every carrier's got out there at the moment. And some are incredibly advanced in that area. So those two, fleet conversion and CO2 measurement, and they were ranked, again, significantly higher by the C-level element of it. And then in terms of what they were actually seeing in terms of the numbers involved with that, you saw that effectively there's been great efforts today. If you look at some of the measures, I know they're quite close surveys, posts have reduced their carbon element by 34%. Now, some of that is an appreciation of decline in letter volume, but it's still a significant number. But 100,000 vehicles have been put on the road that are now electric. So it's not surprising that you see the C-levels and the operational team saying, okay, how do I put another 100,000 on the road and how do I do it effectively? So being able, again, goes back to the same point, you're optimizing your mix of resources, or assets in this case, as well as resources, and knowing that you have to do that without disrupting your delivery operation, because fundamentally that affects your service, number one, as we said, in people's pride, which will ultimately affect your profitability.
That's really interesting what you've just said, because it confirms what people are saying informally around the sector, that there's a desire to convert delivery networks to lower emissions or zero emission mode, but what's the word used? Doing it effectively.
Yes.
Basically, is the key. And then from a strategic perspective, another interesting phrase that one postal operator used is about a social license. In the future, there'll be increasing demand from individual consumers or consumers collectively. They will expect delivery companies to be green. Whereas during the pandemic, we could have delivered using coal-fired, steam cars or whatever. Nobody would have cared.
Not for a couple of months probably, but I think if it had carried on, it might have made some headlines. But no, you're absolutely right. That focus is there now, and it's great to see. But goodness me, it's a challenge. And just a couple of points that were brought out around there's is the challenge of range significant? Seems that that's actually being addressed by the fact that electric vehicles are completely different from what they were 5 years ago, and range might not be your challenge. But if you're delivering into the zones that you talked about, the green zones, or you're using cargo bikes, you've got a volumetric challenge. So how much can you physically fit on there? Have you got the data in your systems to understand, actually, on average, for that route, I can deliver 38. Whereas if I had put a van on the road, I could deliver 150. So logically, I need 3.5 of those things. And charging points is the other point. If you have got range, or you want to keep your vehicle charged well because it runs well, or it's the middle of winter and it's north of 45 degrees north or 45 degrees south, you're going to want to be able to have a charging point. So do you know where they are? Can you affect that?
Data seems to be key. You need to have the data, and then it helps you plan your infrastructure,
Yes.
I suppose, without at the risk of putting words into your mouth. Michael.
No, you're completely right.
We've sort of touched on this just in this conversation already about looking forward now. So when we look forward to, say, the next decade, what are some of the key challenges that the delivery sector is facing?
Yeah, and it comes back to the earlier points around those three main elements of, okay, I've got to have an effective way of implementing the sustainability challenge that I have to address as a business. So that was, as I said earlier, that's number one, and then it builds from that. It is about service. People are so focused on what you'd expect them to be within the industry. The other element is a real recognition around resource. So human resource, knowing that effectively, if you cannot understand effectively how you're going to be able to present someone with work that is manageable. So as a subcontractor, as directly employed, as a courier, are you able to present to them consistently work that they can do and they want to continue doing? Because otherwise people are leaving the industry and then it spirals. So yeah, those resource challenges are front of mind for both C-level and operational leaders.
I'm really glad you mentioned churn, driver churn. It's not spoken about enough. And when I see drivers come into the sector and leave 2 weeks later because it wasn't what they expected, you think, well, what was driven that? And it's often because they weren't getting enough volume. Volume. And so they leave. So why is that? Why haven't they got enough volume? Because there's not enough data and not enough planning behind that.
Exactly that. And that's what we're seeing when we're talking to clients, that it's one of two things. You're absolutely right, that you're not able to give them a sustainable commercial venture that you're going into, that you're partnering with that individual or company, and it has to work for them commercially. And then at the other extreme is expecting them to do something that just physically isn't possible. And there's such competition it does vary by country, and people are very well aware of that. But there's many countries where effectively, if you're not offering someone a good job or a good commercial venture, they'll go and do something else because you're in competition with people that you might not have been in competition before, particularly in professional driving with PSV drivers, for example. The recruitment, certainly in the UK, to get people to do that role has been huge. So that becomes attractive to someone who likes to operate a vehicle. So if you're not able to provide them with an environment in which they want to work, it's going to be very difficult to reduce churn and then ultimately deliver service.
Now let's talk about solutions, because that's what Kardinal is all about, providing solutions to some of these challenges. So what are the kind of tools or the kind of solutions that Kardinal has to be able to assist postal and parcel companies overcome some of these challenges that we've been talking about?
Yeah, it comes down to some fundamentals around data, and if you did a workout on data for this discussion, it would be pretty high. And what we are very good at, and what our founders are highly experienced and educated in, is how do you take data at a high volume level and turn it into data that you can then use. So it's getting it into the machine, and getting it into the machine as an individual entity. So effectively, a parcel delivery point, you know what it is all the way through, making some assumptions about where you've got data gaps and being able to say, okay, if I've got some analogous data and the client is happy to use that. We can use that on an assumptive basis, but give very high confidence levels. We can handle millions and millions, billions of data points very, very quickly. So we take away some of the challenges that planners and leaders have had for years, which is I've got all this great data, but I'm not getting any information out. So we'll cleanse the data, we'll turn it into usable information. And from that, we're able to then create, I wouldn't say endless scenarios. That's what we're trying to tell ourselves not to say, but multiple scenarios. So if you're a company that's delivering somewhere between 50 and 250 million items a year, we can take 3 years' data and then run it with these fantastic range of possibilities. So we will give you the capability to say, that could be my worst challenge of the day, and that's my optimum challenge of the day. Where do I want to plan my routes and my depot design in between those 2 points? The optimal day that everybody loves going in and having, and the day that's incredibly challenging because it's Wednesday after Black Friday, when the volume just smashes into you. And we're able to give you a prediction of what that day would look like and then plan accordingly. And then take a different view that says, well, that might not happen. We might lose a customer, gain a customer, organic growth, as I said earlier, and then be able to say, okay, here's 10 scenarios that you can plan for, and you'll be able to make decisions about depot location, number of routes, and the kind of operating hours that you want those routes to run on. So fundamentally, take data, turn it into information, allow you to plan and do that in a matter of weeks, days and weeks, not months. So, and then we'll give you the user interface for that activity to be done by yourselves rather than having to get involve us, build a platform.
And does that then flow through to some of the other things you were mentioning before, things like negotiating price with subcontractors, or even looking at the environmental and planning and evaluation of environmental aspects?
Yeah, completely. And we've got some great use cases that people can take away and look for themselves around exactly that, about looking at, okay, if I was to have a contractor situation with a number of parameters around rate, about volume and about range, then we'll allow the tool to benefit both parties so that it's a sustainable proposition that's made to the contractor. So absolutely, we've done that with clients, and we're able to assist in presenting with a range of options around how a rate would be effective. And on fleet conversion, I mentioned it earlier, one of the key aspects is volumetric. So we can use volumetric data to effectively have an opportunity to look at whether it's cargo bikes, or its range, or you're delivering to a number of PUDO points. So you've got a bulk delivery aspect there, and you won't have the anomalous planning issue that you sometimes get, which is I've got one delivery point and 35 items to deliver and 25 to collect. So we'll take your data and be able to put you in a position that your activity to convert the fleet to not just electric, but any mode will be enabled through the platform.
Now, if people want to download the report or get in contact with Kardinal, where should they go?
Very simply, go to the website, cardinal.ai. Cardinal is spelled with a K. And there you'll find this report. You'll also find the use cases, and you'll be able to see what applies to you. And all I'd add is there's use cases there. One of the other strengths that we have is our solution engineering team. Vastly experienced in the industry and in academia and previous sector experience, and they'll be able to sit down and have a conversation with you and turn your problems and your pain points into effectively an approach that will agree between us. So there's not a one-size-fits all approach. It's very much around what problem are we solving and how can we design our service to meet that.
I'll stick a link to the Kardinal website on the episode page on thepostalhub.com. So if you're out walking the dog or lifting weights at the gym or whatever you do, while you're listening to this podcast and you haven't been able to jot it down, just go to thepostalhub.com and you'll find a link there. Michael Anderson, Head of Business at Kardinal, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Ian. Great to chat.
There are many more great conversations coming up soon on the Postal Hub podcast. Don't miss any of them. Subscribe to a couple of things. Subscribe to the podcast, first of all, in your favourite podcast platform. That way you get every episode downloaded automatically to the device of your choosing. You can also email, I'll get it in a second, everybody. You can also subscribe to my email newsletter that I send out every time there's a new episode. Head on over to thepostalhub.com, the Postal Hub, that's where you cook your postal stuff, thepostalhub.com, and look for the links to subscribe to the email newsletter there. You can also subscribe to the Daily Delivery Digest while you're over there, a daily email direct to your inbox every day, that's why it's daily, with all the headlines from around the delivery world. You can follow me on LinkedIn if you want something slightly more coherent than this outro to this episode of the Postal Hub podcast. And if you want to email me about anything at all, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.